Section 1.2, Observational Studies versus Design Experiments. The objectives in this section, by the end of this lesson, you will be able to distinguish between an observational study and a designed experiment, identify possible lurking variables, and explain the various types of observational studies. To begin, we're going to discuss some of the ways to collect data. So in general, there are a few standards. We have census, existing resources, survey sampling, designed experiments. Most of us associate the word census with the U.S. Census, but it actually has a broader definition. A census is a list of all individuals in a population along with certain characteristics of each individual. Now, the nice part about a census is that it gives us all the information we want. Of course, it's usually impossible to get. Imagine trying to interview every single CMC student. That'd be around 2,000 interviews. So if we can't get a census, what do? Well, a great source of data is other studies that have already been completed. If you're trying to answer a particular question, look to see if someone else has already collected data about that population. As your textbook says, the moral of the story is this: don't collect data that have already been collected. Now, why is the U.S. Census so important? The results of the census are used to determine the number of representatives in each state in the House of Representatives, boundaries of congressional districts, distribution of funds for government programs such as Medicaid, and planning for the constructions of roads and schools. So, let's consider the following two studies. First example, cellular phones and brain tumors researchers Joachim Schutz and associates wanted to investigate cancer risk among Danish cellular phone users who were followed up for up to 21 years. To do so, they kept track of 420,095 people whose first cellular telephone subscription was between 1982 and 1995. In 2002, they recorded the number of people out of the 420,095 people who had a brain tumor and compared the rate of brain tumors in this group to the rate of brain tumors in the general population. They found no significant difference in the rate of brain tumors between the two groups. The researchers concluded cellular telephone was not associated with increased risk for brain tumors. Another example here. Cellular phones and brain tumors researchers Joseph L. Roti and associates examined whether chronic exposure to radio frequency RF radiation at two common cell phone signals, 835.62 megahertz, a frequency used by analog cell phones, and 847.74 megahertz, a frequency used by digital cell phones, caused brain tumors in rats. The rats in group 1 were exposed to the analog cell phone frequency. The rats in group 2 were exposed to the digital frequency. The rats in group 3 served as controls and received no radiation. The exposure was done for 4 hours a day, 5 days a week for 2 years. The rats in all three groups were treated the same except for the RF exposure. After 505 days of exposure, the researchers reported the following after analyzing the data. We found no statistically significant increases in any tumor type, including brain, liver, lung, or kidney compared to the control group. Now, here's the source. Now, in both studies, the goal of the research was to determine if radio frequencies from cell phones increased the risk of contracting brain tumors. Whether or not brain cancer was contracted is the response variable. The level of cell phone usage is the explanatory variable. In research, we wish to determine how varying the amount of an explanatory variable affects the value of a response variable. Now, observational studies versus designed experiments. Now, to one of the main objectives for this section, two other very common sources of data are observational studies and designed experiments. We're going to take some time here to describe them and distinguish between them. You'll be expected to be able to do the same in homework and on your first quiz. The easiest examples of observational studies are surveys. No attempt is made to influence anything. Just ask questions and record the responses. So by definition, we would say that an observational study measures the characteristics of a population by studying individuals in a sample, but does not attempt to manipulate or influence the variables of interest. That is, in an observational study, the researcher observes the behavior of the individuals in the study without trying to influence the outcome of the study. A designed experiment applies a treatment to the individuals, referred to as experimental units or subjects, and attempts to isolate the effects of the treatment on a response variable. If a researcher randomly assigns the individuals in a study to groups, intentionally manipulates the value of an explanatory variable and controls other explanatory variables at fixed values, and then records the value of the response variable for each individual. This study is a designed experiment. Design experiments explicitly do attempt to influence results. They try to determine what effect a particular treatment has on an outcome. Now, two definitions here. A confounding in a study occurs when the effects of two or more explanatory variables are not separated. Therefore, any relation that may exist between an explanatory variable and the response variable may be due to some other variable or variables not accounted for in a study. Now, a lurking variable is an explanatory variable that was not considered in a study, but that affects the value of the response variable. So let's take a look at this example here. Now, observational study or designed experiment. Do flu shots benefit seniors? Researchers wanted to determine the long-term benefits of the influenza vaccine on seniors aged 65 years and older. The researchers looked at records of over 36,000 seniors for 10 years. The seniors were divided into two groups. Group 1 were seniors who chose to get a flu vaccination shot, and Group 2 were seniors who chose not to get a flu vaccination shot. After observing the seniors for 10 years, it was determined that seniors who get flu shots are 27% less likely to be hospitalized for pneumonia or influenza and 48% less likely to die from pneumonia or influenza. And here is the source associated with that study. Now, why is the influenza study mentioned in an observational study and not a designed experiment? Well, the seniors decided whether or not to get a flu shot. The researchers did not decide who would get a flu shot and did not impose any other conditions on the study, which is the reason why it's an observational study. List some changes that could be made to investigate the effectiveness of the flu shot with a designed experiment. The researchers can take a group of seniors and decide which seniors would get the flu shot and which seniors will get a placebo. List some lurking variables in the influenza study: age, health status, mobility of the senior, and so on. What are some variables besides getting a flu vaccine that may play a role in whether one contracts pneumonia or influenza? General health of the senior. Is the senior ambulatory? Genetics, age. So based on the results of this study, would you recommend that all seniors go out and get a flu shot? Well, the study may have flaws, and again, namely confounding. Now, a confounding variable is an explanatory variable that was considered in a study whose effect cannot be distinguished from a second explanatory variable in the study. What is the big difference between lurking variables and confounding variables? Well, the big difference between lurking variables and confounding variables is that lurking variables are not considered in the study, whereas confounding variables are measured in the study. Okay, now, probably the biggest difference between observational studies and design experiments is the issue of association versus causation. Since observational studies don't control any variables, the results can only be associations. Because variables are controlled in a designed experiment, then we can have conclusions of causation. So therefore, observation studies only allow us to claim association, not causation. Now, what are the types of observational studies? We have cross-sectional studies, or observational studies that collect information about individuals at a specific point in time or over a very short period of time. Case control studies are observational studies that are retrospective, meaning they require individuals to look back in time or require the researcher to look at existing records. In case control studies, individuals who have certain characteristics may be matched with those who do not. So one possible difficulty that may occur and affect the outcomes of a case control study is that there may be an issue with poor memories when records do not exist. And the advantages of performing a case control study over a cross-sectional study is that there is a control group and a research group. Cohort studies are observational studies that follow a group of individuals over a long period of time. Characteristics of the individuals are recorded, and some individuals will be exposed to certain factors, not intentionally, and others will not. Because the data are collected over a long period of time, these studies are prospective. An advantage of using a cohort study is that the researcher does not need to rely on memory of study participants or existing records. Some disadvantages of using a cohort study is that they would require a lot of time and could be expensive. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples and what is the type of study. Okay, determine whether each of the following studies depict an observational study or an experiment. If the researchers conducted an observational study, determine the type of the observational study. So part A, researchers wanted to assess the long-term psychological effects of children evacuated during World War II. They obtained a sample of 169 former evacuees and a control group of 43 people who were children during the war that were not evacuated. The subjects' mental states were evaluated using questionnaires. It was determined that the psychological well-being of individuals was adversely affected by evacuation. This is considered a case-controlled observational study. Part B. Xylitol has proven effective in preventing dental cavities when included in food or gum. A total of 75 Peruvian children were given milk with and without xylitol and were asked to evaluate the taste of each. Overall, the children preferred the milk flavored with xylitol. This is a designed experiment. Part C. A total of 974 homeless women in the Los Angeles area were surveyed to determine their level of satisfaction with the health care provided by the shelter clinics versus the health care provided by government clinics. This is a cross-sectional observational study. Part D. The Cancer Prevention Study 2, CPS-2, is funded and conducted by the American Cancer Society. Its goal is to examine the relationship among environmental and lifestyle factors on cancer cases by tracking approximately 1.2 million men and women. Study participants completed an initial study questionnaire in 1982 providing information on a range of lifestyle factors such as diet, alcohol and tobacco use, occupation, medical history, and family cancer history. These data have been examined extensively in relation to cancer mortality. Vital status of study participants is updated biannually. Cause of death has been documented for over 98% of all deaths that have occurred. Mortality followed up of the CPS-2 participants is complete through 2002 and is expected to continue for many years. This is a cohort observational study. Now, it is not always possible to conduct an experiment. Why we could not conduct an experiment to investigate the perceived link between high-tension wires in leukemia on humans. Well, it would be unethical to deliberately expose a person to something that could cause leukemia. Now, the following are some agencies that regularly collect data that are available to the public: the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Department of Justice collect data that is available to the public. Also, the University of Chicago's General Social Survey is a useful source of data.